It's 2021 and schools have reopened and society has reopened, but some people are skeptical. What are the impact of reopening schools during COVID? What are the consequences of closing schools again? And what are the benefits, if any, of keeping it virtual? This is Save the Water. I'm your host, Dr. Claville, and I want you to stay tuned in because after these commercial breaks, we'll explore the impact of reopening schools during COVID-19. Welcome back. Thank you again for joining us. You're listening to State of the Water. I'm your host, Dr. Claville, and we want to thank you for joining us on this beautiful Sunday, August 29, 2021, here in Hampton Roads, where we're broadcasting on the campus of Norfolk State University, home of the Spartan Nation. And this is the start of the first week of classes for students. That's right. Norfolk State University welcomed its freshman class and sophomore class back to campus, and also our juniors, seniors, and graduate students. Just like our producer here, Marvin Folks, also known as DJ Scandalous, he's back and he's here finishing up, and he'll graduate this December. And there are so many of our wonderful students that have those aspirations, those dreams that they know that they can accomplish right here on the campus of Norfolk State University, home of the Spartan Nation. So we're excited about them starting and finishing and going out into the world doing great things. Also, we want to thank everyone for your support of State of the Water, your continued listening. We celebrated our 1-year anniversary, and now we're into our second season coming up. So again, without you, there could be no us, and we want to thank you again for your support. So this is the last segment of our Closer Look series, where we delve into issues that are affecting us across the country, and more specifically in our communities, where we see it on the news, but we don't really delve in, we don't really hear the ins and outs of it. We don't really hear the fine print, right? But here on A Closer Look during this series, we're peeling back the issue, we're peeling back the policies, and we're delving into it to understand it much better. So on this Closer Look series, we're taking a look at the impact of reopening schools during COVID-19. Now, some people would say we've come out of COVID, and we believe that we should have come out of COVID. But there are a lot of issues that are now complicating this recovery. Now, for those of us who are fully vaccinated and for those of us who are wearing masks, we're doing our part and feeling we're doing our part in order to help ourselves and to help our community. And there are those that either don't believe in vaccines or don't want to take vaccines or don't believe in masks or don't want to wear masks for whatever reason. And there are those that believe, according to the science, that they're putting themselves at risk because there are different variants out there, and they're putting others at risk as well. Whatever the case may be, we know one thing, that schools are reopened for our K through 12 especially. Now, and also higher education. Now, I will say this, for higher education, many universities have mandated vaccines. Here on the campus of Norfolk State University, we have mandated vaccines. Many institutions across the Commonwealth of Virginia have mandated vaccines for all faculty, students, and staff, unless, of course, you have a religious or medical reason that's documented that you receive a waiver for. But what about K through 12? What about students that cannot receive a vaccine because they're too young? What about the staff? What about the teachers? What about the principals? What about the administration who tend to be much older and are at high risk? What is the impact of them going into packed rooms or classrooms and having class in person with, for the most part, not having vaccines, but wearing masks? And what about school districts that have not mandated masks, but have really used this as a wedge issue to stop individuals from wearing masks? All of these are issues surrounding reopening of schools. Now, of course, here in the Commonwealth, we know that we don't reopen until after Labor Day. But there are some schools that have reopened across the country. And here we've seen the fallout of some of this. As a matter of fact, in Louisiana, in New Orleans Parish, they had to quarantine several thousand students because of a COVID outbreak that took place. At some universities, they had to quarantine or shut down class for about a week because of COVID-19 outbreak. And we also know in the state of Florida, of course, in other states, in Texas, but we know these are the two hotbed states right now in the news, but there are other school districts around the country that are fighting students wearing masks. They're fighting students protecting not only themselves, but also protecting others. So, and with the availability of vaccines for high school kids, now we're looking at K through 12, but we're breaking it down also based upon high schools, based upon classification, middle school, elementary school, and seeing what is that impact there. So let's take a look. We know that we've had pre-K schools, daycares that have reopened during COVID, in the midst of COVID, because parents had to go back to work. So in looking at how those daycares, those preschools operated during COVID, I think there's a lot that we can learn. Keep in mind, they operated pre-vaccine and they're operating post-vaccine. And we've seen a very large success rate of individuals who are working in those facilities, those teachers' aides, that are being successful at still educating little kids, the future of our society, while, of course, protecting themselves. Now, I know with little kids, they look at things they look at everything as maybe a game, right? If you make it a game, it could be fun. It could be an adventure. So for little kids, you can imagine wearing a mask. Oh, if you wear your mask and so forth, take your mask off, take it off on the playground, you make it a game, they get into it. I've seen it with little kids. I've seen it, of course, with some family members that I have that are in preschool, and it's fun to them. So by doing so, they've been able to be safe. Now, that's, I believe, again, you look at best practices, that's a success. That's a success right there. So, but when we move away from daycares and preschool, I will say this. Science have shown that kids they can be carriers, but they can also get COVID, but it doesn't affect them the same way it affects adults. Things are strange, but that's a good thing because right now there are no vaccines that are available or approved for those kids. So let's look at the K through 12, from kindergarten all the way to fifth grade, what we call elementary school. Now, of course, we talk about social distancing. We talk about making sure that you're washing your hands and so forth. But let's be honest here. We're talking about little kids, elementary school. And germs fly. Of course, we're in COVID, but still, we have colds. We have runny noses. We have pink eye. We have every other thing that you could imagine that individuals receive and little kids receive. So those things are going to happen. And it's hard to keep little kids away from each other because that's where they learn social skills. That's how they socialize. So what is going to be the success or the norms that they would have to operate within in order to protect themselves and ensure that we don't have an outbreak? Ironically, we've seen that there's not been a lot of pushback or a lot of news coverage on elementary schools. So obviously right now we see that there is some success there because they're in that age group where it's not affecting them as much. And we see where the teachers, when some school districts, we're going to get to this in a second, but those individuals are more apt to know how to deal and work with little kids like that. So fast forward to middle school. Now we're in the middle of elementary and high school. And these individuals, at that age, you're growing, you're maturing, and you start to develop your personality and your friends and so forth. So there's still an area where you can be able to control their actions and be able to monitor them. And usually middle schools are smaller because you only have 3 grades there. So now we see this dynamic working in middle schools. Again, we have not had a lot of news coverage about any outbreaks or any disruptions in education because at the middle school level. But when we go to high school, that's where we see the pushback. That's where we see the major news coverage about that, about wearing masks, the news coverage about the outbreaks that are taking place. And that's because now we're in an age group where COVID now starts to affect you more so like adults. Now we're in a time and an age period where kids are closer, they're becoming young adults, and they're becoming individuals with their own minds, and they're listening to their parents. So if their parents are pro-vaccination, their parents are pro following the rules and the CDC guidelines, and more than likely the kids are going to do it. Or they're going to do it at least while they're in the eye of their parents and also in the eye of their teachers. Then we have the opposite on the flip side of the coin. If your parents are not for vaccines and definitely against masks, and you're believing various theories that are not proven by science or by facts, or you believe that this is something that is stopping your freedom and your rights, then you're going to more than likely gravitate toward that. So now we have ideology affecting, the behavior of our students. So now we see how society is learning to operate in the consequences and the successes, but more so the consequences of not being vaccinated or wearing your mask. The interesting thing about high school is that now kids are able to be vaccinated. And keep in mind, in middle school too, from 12 to 17, you can be vaccinated. So now we start to help create herd immunity. We start to help to stop the virus from coming in and affecting anyone, infecting individuals from getting sick, and not just getting sick, but all being hospitalized and unfortunately losing their lives. Now, there have been stories. I mentioned how the virus affects, and of course, this is all based upon studies and science and CDC. We have had children here in the Commonwealth and a few others across the country who have succumbed to COVID. So we do see that. That has happened. But when you look at the total number, it's more so adults, the elderly, individuals with compromised immune systems and the like. So what is the solution? What are we in for the start of the year? We're only, in some school districts, we're only 1 month in. I mean, we haven't gotten to the tip of the iceberg, as we say, on this. So this is going to be very interesting. But at the same time, it's going to really take a major effort to get everyone on the same page, of most individuals, if we're going to continue to offer the high-level education to our students that they deserve, because these are our future leaders. And let's not forget the impact of our teachers. Our teachers have done a phenomenal job teaching virtually, some with more resources than others based upon your school district, some dealing with so many issues outside of just teaching because of various challenges that some of our students have in the home, or maybe difficult learning on the screen and virtually. I mean, all of these things happen, all of these things impacting, and they rose to the occasion and they did a phenomenal job. So the raises that they got based upon the governor and also the state legislature implementing those raises is well deserved. Moving forward, we also got to protect their health because our teachers are older. Our teachers are older than the students, definitely. But we want to make sure that we keep them around and not just keep them around, but keep them flourishing, keep them advancing so that they can educate our children. That's the key. And that's where we are in where we are with the reopening of schools. Now, we're going to take a quick look at the impact of closing that we found when we closed schools. You're listening to WNSB Blazing Hot 91 during the 91 days of summer. This is State of the Water. I'm your host, Dr. Eric Claville, and we're taking a closer look in the Closer Look series at the impact of reopening schools during COVID. We just discussed and looked at how schools are reopening from pre-K all the way to 12th grade, K through 12, as we call it, and some of the challenges that they're facing. Now we're going to take a look at the challenges of what happened to when we close schools and what teachers are facing now. In our second half hour, we'll take a look at the benefits of reopening schools and how we can actually do it. So when schools actually close, when schools closed during COVID, when it first came about, there were some people that were able to pick up and continue moving forward. They had the technology, or they had access to get additional technology. School systems were able to get funding from the federal government to provide learning tablets and the like. Sounds good, right? But there were other challenges out there. According to an article from UNESCO, and this takes a global look at the closure of schools, but it applies to all of us. If we take a look at the cost of the high social and economic costs of closing schools across communities, the impact, according to this article, can be extremely severe. It can affect marginalized and vulnerable students, their families, their community. And the disparities that existed creates a learning gap that is almost insurmountable in the short time that we have in our normal school year. So that's why year-round school has been discussed. But according to UNESCO, let's take a look at a few issues that have affected students and what teachers are having to endure now as they come back to learn. When schools closed, we interrupted learning. And by doing so, this disadvantaged some youth. It deprived them of some growth and development. It disadvantaged them disproportionately for underprivileged learners and individuals who tend to have fewer educational opportunities beyond school. You know, there are some parents that weren't able to be there while their kids were learning. Make sure that they get up. Make sure that they turn on the computer. Make sure they turn on their camera during class. Make sure that they're turning in their work on time. Make sure that they're not wasting the time. Interrupted learning. And now they're not only just a year behind, but they're behind in the development of what that year really means. Also, schools are great for learning. Schools are great for social skills, but also they're a great place to provide great nutrition for individuals that don't have it, and really for all of us. So many children relied upon the nutrition at school, the breakfast, the lunch, and the snacks when they leave for after-school programs. I mean, those are some of the solid meals that some students receive every day. Because of that, now our teachers are dealing with students who were impacted by poor nutrition when schools closed down. On top of that, our students were impacted and by the challenges created when maintaining and improving the distance learning. In other words, think about it. if you were supposed to do XYZ assignment, or you were supposed to ensure that you had additional learning materials and you didn't do it, now you're coming behind. And again, this goes to being behind in schools and having students to catch up and teachers to catch them up. Not only that, but let's talk about the teachers. The teachers dealt with so much confusion and so much stress that now they're bringing that and having to deal with that as well with schools reopening. Now, again, you say, well, we had the summer to decompress. Well, the summer, again, for all of us, we were decompressing. I mean, we were trying to get back out. We were trying to get back into society. We were trying to move forward. And there were so many issues that we were dealing with. So teachers are just like all of us. They have families. They have their own children. And they have to ensure the continuity of their own families before they can really impact our students in the classroom. So now we're dealing with that issue. Not only that, but we're also dealing with the issue of the rise in dropout rates. There are so many students that were lost. You heard this issue, this term, while we're dealing with COVID. Many people didn't really know it existed. But when we deal with students that are missing, it's not as if they're missing and you can't find them, but they're not coming to school. I mean, literally not coming to school. The truancy, the virtual truancy was, it was almost an epidemic within itself in some school districts. So now trying to get those students back into the mode, trying to get those students back into school itself, into that mindset of learning is another challenge that teachers are having to deal with the reopening of schools. I mean, imagine a student that was right there, but then because of the last 18 months, they've fallen off. They don't really know or really want to get back into school. And now the pressure's on the teachers in order to do that, which also brings pressure on the passage rate, on standardized tests. It brings pressure on the school system, the principal. It brings added pressure across the board. And will there be a COVID reprieve? I don't know. I don't, it's that's a hard question, but that's really up to parents, school district, and policymakers as we take a look at what the scores are and the challenges moving forward. But I'm telling you, that's going to be a challenge of teachers in helping to deal with that dropout rate when students come back this year. In addition to that, teachers and schools are dealing with the effects of social isolation. When schools are shut down, like I said, it's a great place to socialize. My son basically missed his senior year, because that was his big year and he had so many plans. He said, Dad, we're going to do this and that. And we're excited about this and that. And you can only imagine being a senior on campus now. No more the freshman, sophomore, or junior, but you're the senior. And if you're involved in extracurricular activities like our children are, sports and music, and then extracurricular, maybe on the court, academia, that's right, Marvin, academia, various clubs, all that was gone. And some students, well, of course, seniors can never get it back. That's done. Now, of course, some were able to do proms and so forth, and not homecomings, but they were able to end it on a high note. Of course, graduations were able to be ended as well on high notes. But when we talk about the effects of that social isolation, that's huge, because now you have some kids that were again, on the brink, at the verge of coming out of that various issues that they were dealing with, but being isolated during COVID. Now they've taken a step back, and now they're back in the classroom, and teachers have to deal with that particular issue. And then finally, we're looking at the issue of challenges measuring and validating the learning. I mean, remember, I mentioned, will we get a COVID reprieve? All these issues that I just discussed, and I didn't discuss the entire list. I mean, this list is very extensive, but I didn't discuss it. But I hit some of the points that I think are pertinent right now for everyone. And when we talk about the challenges of measuring and validating learning, we're talking about assessments. We're talking about high stakes exams. We're talking about admission to new educational levels, institutions. All of this is basically was disrupted. And we have to rethink it now. Last year, universities they said, it's okay. You can apply without the ACT or SAT. Will that happen again? I don't think so. But will there be an advantage or will there be a disadvantage to students that did not receive that in-person learning for the last 18 months? Not just a full year, but remember that was part of one school year, half of it, where individuals had to learn from home. And some material may not have been covered. So that is huge. So now, if you're a junior and you're getting ready to take the SAT, ACT, how do teachers prepare them? Because there may be there may be a gap in that learning in order to score the appropriate score on that college entrance exam. And how does that affect colleges and universities? Right? Their admissions, well, they have to also give a COVID reprieve based upon that impact. Now, again, some states, some school districts, they didn't miss a beat. Some parents, some families had resources where they could supplement and they can move forward. But everyone did not. So that's where we look at the challenges, the impact. We're not just not talking about sitting in class, mask mandate, but now we're talking about, or even COVID outbreaks. But now we're looking at the impact of learning when they come back into the schools. And finally, before we take the commercial break to get to the second half hour, the impact of opening for higher education. As I stated before, universities have reopened, and a lot of universities, including ours, have mandated vaccines. So there, we're creating an environment that's safer, an environment that's more conducive to learning, both virtually and in person. But now we have the sporting events, where now they're telling visitors, you have to show that you are fully vaccinated or a negative COVID test within so many hours before you can get in. I think it's the right move because now you have an opportunity to control your environment for the greater good. And hey, if you don't agree with it, there are other options out there. You have online universities. You have the ability to take a gap year if you like. But where things are mandated, policies are mandated, it's really mandated for the safer good, for the greater good and the safety of everyone else. So what is the impact moving forward as relates to some students that won't come back? Some parents are more comfortable with teaching online. What will be their advantage or disadvantage? You listen to State of Water. I'm your host, Dr. Eric Claville, and we'll be right back after these commercial breaks as we take a closer look at the impact of reopening schools in COVID. Welcome back. You're listening to State of the Water. I'm your host, Dr. Eric Claville. Once again, I want to thank you for joining us again on this beautiful Sunday here in Hampton Roads and wherever you're listening from. Again, we thank all the supporters that support this program, that support our radio station, WNSB Blazing Hot 91, and that support Norfolk State University. And a special shout out to the Spartan Nation. Welcome to all the students that are here on campus. This starts the first week of class. We're excited for you. We're excited about your future. We're excited about where you're going because this is the place where your dreams can be realized and you can go out into the world and do great things, just like the many, many Spartan alumni that we have across the world. And again, thank the Spartan Nation for your support of Save the Water as we continue to delve into issues where we bring movers and shakers and policymakers to you to discuss issues that are important to the community. So on this Closer Look series, we're peeling back the policy and the covers and taking a look at the impact of reopening schools in COVID-19. In the first half hour, we took a look at the challenges that all schools, from daycares to pre-K all the way through K through 12 and higher education, are having as they reopen schools. The battles with the mask mandate, the battles with vaccine mandate for those who can be vaccinated. And also the uncertainty until vaccinations are approved for those who are under 12 years old. We also delved into and took a look at the impact of some of the issues that teachers and students, but teachers and administrators and school systems will have to deal with when reopening schools. The learning gap and all the things surrounding the learning gap and that attributed to it are major. And schools just not reopening, but there's also social anxiety. There's issues with socializing. How do we now handle the social activities such as games, football and basketball games, pep rallies, all of these issues that are surrounding the reopening of schools and the impact during COVID. But in order to understand the full issue, we also have to take a look at parents that feel that reopening schools may be too much, or parents that feel that we're moving too fast, or others that are just outright not wanting to come back to school because they don't want to adhere to the policies of wearing masks, to the policies of actually, vaccines and the like. So some parents are sticking with remote learning, even as schools reopen. Some communities are forming these learning pods, and they're continuing to form these learning pods as opposed to moving forward and going back to school. We're going to take a look at this study in this article from the Brookings Institute that talks about why parents are choosing to stick with remote learning. Now, here we know that some of this is preference, but quite a few parents, are really looking at staying home. And I think this is for safety reasons. And I think this study is very important because it points out and it breaks it down through race and gender, race, about how certain groups are viewing remote learning. So Understanding America study, and it's called UAS, that data collected from approximately 1,500 K through 12 parents, mid-April to end of May, it shows a sizable gap along racial and ethnic lines, with 19% of white parents currently preferring fully remote instruction compared to 43% of Black and 42% of Hispanic families. These large gaps by household income are also evident. Now, according to this article, despite progress on vaccines and rapidly diminishing case rates, there are still stark differences by race and income in preference for remote versus in-person learning and attendance. It still persists. That's significant because I know we see on the news and we see on television where we see their parents in school board meetings, they're voicing their concerns, some becoming very violent within those meetings, and the protests outside, unmask my kids, and freedom, and all these things, right? But according to this study, there's a difference here in the people that we're seeing on the news and what actually parents prefer. So according to this article, for most children, in-person education is higher quality. I would agree with that than remote. also with academic progress and also mental health. And also, what you find where educators have to work harder during the pandemic to meet the needs of the students in remote learning, from just not instruction, but also educational. So what ends up happening is that now you have issues packed on top of expectations for teachers, once again, having to deal with teaching some students in person, some students remote. Only because you see where some school systems were not prepared to offer high quality remote instruction, and even less to offer high quality in-person or remote instruction simultaneously. So now we take a look at the impact of this. The impact of this is some students, Marvin, are going to get high quality instruction. They're going to get more attention by the teacher. They're going to get more opportunity to talk with their classmates, collaborate, as opposed to sending a text message or something in chat if they're in person. They're going to be able to go to the teacher and say, I have an issue with this. Can I bring my book up here? Or can you take a look at this experiment? Can you take a look at this problem? And it's that one-on-one, that in-person learning that really helps quite a few of us, if not all of us, learn issues or learn things better. I mean, it helps me. I'm an in-person learning type of individual, my learning style. I know for kids, they're developing. That's right. They need in person. That's right, Marvin. They need in person. It's kind of hard to really make that impact virtually, because if you're virtual, let's be honest. If I see your head in the camera, or hopefully your camera's on, now, I don't know what else you're doing. I don't know if your attention's being taken away. And I'm forced to give a pop-up question to make sure that you answer it while I'm trying to lecture and think through an issue myself. So now it has additional impact upon the teacher's success of being able to teach, as opposed to in person. So what kids are going to suffer? Kids that are remote learning with school systems that are not equipped to handle simultaneous in-person and virtual learning, and students that are impacted by economic means and being disadvantaged socially. So now we start this all over again. It's just not an 18-month gap. We're probably looking at now maybe a 30-month gap if students choose to do that. So let's take a look at this study. Let's take a closer look at this UAS study. Again, I found it very fascinating because these are not the people you see on the news. These are not the ones that you see in these school board meetings. But again, preference and actually being in person or doing something are two different things. But again, according to the study, now this is between April and May of 2021, which we know that not a lot changed in the last couple of months in the summer. So what are some of the reasons why K through 12 parents have for not sending their children to in-person schooling? Number one, in-person, not substantially different from online. There are 4% of parents that were polled that believe that there was no difference. But the learning gap actually shows that it was. The ability to be able to make assessments, the ability to test, the ability to understand issues, it showed that it actually was different. And for all the reasons we just discussed. In person is more impactful, and virtually is not. But again, it's based upon school systems, based upon resources, based upon home situation, based upon learning styles. All these things actually have an impact. Number two, 6% of parents didn't send their schools to in-person schooling because the school safety protocols were uncomfortable for their child. So if we take a look at in-person protocols, You have your mask on in class. You have those shields that are up on some tables. You have not a lot of activities taking place in the hallway. You get your lunch and you come back to your classroom and eat it. It's prepackaged, so you're not in the cafeteria and all that stuff. You know, the fun stuff of school, right? You know, lunch in the cafeteria was like that time. Hey, I need a break. The teachers need a break. Everybody needs a break. But they couldn't do that. And I'm not sure about PE, but that was a great time to go outside, take a break. And after school activities, I know that football couldn't practice at sometimes. The basketball team could practice at sometimes. The baseball team could practice sometimes. Really, the only socially distanced game was golf. And if you're swimming in the pool. So all these things really impacted why parents didn't want to send their kids back to school in this time. Number 3, 7% said adults at school were not vaccinated. So, again, this comes with the mandate. And we're going to talk about, the last thing we're going to talk about is the school mandate. We know what higher education is doing. We're doing it here at Norfolk State University, mandating vaccines. But what about these students and faculty working in K through 12? Should there be a mandate on vaccinations? Should there be individuals that are in high-risk groups? Should they be allowed to come into the school? We'll see. These are all the issues we're still grappling with. Number 4, 8% of parents surveyed said the only option was hybrid. So that's why they weren't sending their kids to in-person school. Because to them, the hybrid was the only option for them. 9% said the logistics and scheduling complications. Now, I can understand that. Because, again, the stress, we're still dealing with teachers. We're still dealing with human beings. We're still dealing with parents. We're still dealing with administrators who are also human beings and parents and have this home situation. And now, and dealing with COVID, and now we have to deal with students in the same way. Also, 10% of parents that did not send their kids back to in-person schooling said that remote allows greater family involvement. Now, again, we're taking a look at different situations. Again, all of these responses are different based upon the school system, based upon the resources, based upon the family unit, and the like. Now, I can see where, for us, COVID gave us an opportunity to spend a lot more time together as a family. You had to. You know, so, hey, let's have, you know, game board night, chess. Let's have movie night. You know, what's on Netflix? Netflix and chill with the family, right? Hey, let's go for a walk as a family, or let's go exercise. Let's go do this or do that. So all these things allow families to have more involvement, which again helps the learning because now you're refreshed, you have a better attitude, family situation is much better. You can go, you can learn, and learning is fun. So some parents said no. We have better opportunity here if we are with our family. But again, that's not true for every family. Some families like, hey, kids coming out of the house is a break for us. So we understand it. They're like, please take our children. I know during move-in weekend, which was last weekend for our freshmen and sophomores coming on campus, one of the questions that the parents had for our administration, our president, was, you know, of course, we had to talk about COVID and protocols. And one of their questions was, you're not going to send them home, are you? You know, when we talked about our safety measures and the like. So there's, you know, parents love their children, but at the same time, they're saying, hey, I think some of us need a break too. So 10% said that remote allows greater family involvement. Another 10% said that there was no in-person option. That's the reason why they didn't send their kids back to school. No in-person option. Now, again, This really depends upon your school system. I know here in the Hampton Roads area, we had just about every school system in first, right, we had hybrid, but at first it was fully remote. But then, of course, with the start of the last year, because again, remember 18 months, so half of, not last year's school year, but the school year before that, 2020, 2021, right, well, the spring was actually what? Was it 2022? Yeah, 2020, 2021. The spring of it was actually half. No, actually, it was 2020. This is during the presidential election. So, yeah. Wow. Time is moving. Time is moving so fast. So, we're not just talking about that school year, 2020. We're also talking about the school year 2020, 2021. But some schools then implemented hybrid options. And in those hybrid options, you were able to say, hey, let's go back to school. You know, and talking with some parents, and I know for us, so we had one child that wanted to go back in person just for a few days because they wanted to spend time with their friends. After it wasn't what they thought it was, they said, no, I just want to be virtual. And other child was like, hey, it's my senior year is over with, so I don't want to go back to school. I'm ready to go to college. So again, it just really depends upon the situation, really the student. There were 10% said other reasons why they didn't send their kids to in-person learning. But there was 13%, a parent survey, that said that existing safety measures were insufficient. Insufficient safety measures. Now, this is the opposite of having too many safety measures. Keep in mind, we're seeing this uproar across the country where parents are livid because their kids have to wear masks, because they're mandating vaccines. Well, for whatever the reason, there are other parents that believe that there should be more safety measures in place. There's not just to be an option to wear masks, but masks should be mandated. There not should be an option for vaccines, but you should be vaccinated. Just like you're turning your Tdap records, your vaccination records for polio, tuberculosis, chickenpox, measles, and the like. And then as you get older, you go to school, meningitis. You get another meningitis shot when you go off to college. Of course, when you're older, you can get the shingles shot, which of course just like adult chickenpox, and many other vaccines to help us live a fuller life and a life that's free of deadly diseases. So some parents believe that this should be mandatory, but we're going to get into that at the very last question. Another 20% said that families like remote learning schedule better. I can say with our remote learning schedule, we experienced that there were 2 days kids went to school, alternated classes, and then you had that Wednesday, I believe, where you could actually do catch up and have meetings and so forth. And then you had Thursday, Friday. You know, we gave that day, said, hey, sons, wake up in the morning, still do your work. You can wake up a little later, do your homework, do any catch up, have a meeting with your teacher. The second half of the day, don't do any work. Go have fun. Go have fun. And when I say have fun, of course, safety fun, out in the park, out doing XYZ in the yard, you know, playing the video games with their friends that they do with connecting all across the country, playing various games. But basically, take care of yourself, have fun. So that schedule really helped to help provide a balance to learning because it was difficult. It was difficult. Another 22% that the child is the same or happier. So it was like, well, what do you think about in person or virtual? Well, we don't really care, you know. And of course, kids will say that, but we all know. Several other reasons why parents did not send their kids back in person. 25% said the child is doing the same or better academically. 28% said they do not trust the school to keep their child safe. 30% said the child wants to stay remote. And 45% said that it was safer to stay virtual for our child and our family. For our child and our family. And when we break this down by ethnicity, we're asking parents, are they planning for their child to return to remote learning in 2021, 2022? If we take a look at Asian Americans, said that they were 5.8% said that they would be remote, 7.1% unsure, and 12.9% said that remote plus unsure. 7.8% of whites said that they will remain remote, 9% said unsure, 16.9% said remote or plus unsure. Of the Hispanics, they said that 8.5% would remain remote, 19.2% unsure, 27.7% remote plus unsure. Of the black population or race ethnicity, 19% that surveyed, 19.6% said remote, 18.5% unsure, and 38.1% of black citizens that were polled said that they would remain remote plus unsure. Overall, 23% said that they would remain remote plus unsure, 10% remote, and 13% unsure. Those are some major gaps. Those are major disparities in how parents feel when you break it down by race and ethnicity about in-person learning. Again, we mentioned that in-person learning itself was a higher degree or higher rate of quality teaching because of all the advantages of being in person. We talked about how in-person learning has a higher level of interaction between students and teachers, higher level of social development because you're there with friends. In-person learning gives a lot of advantages to students, to teachers, to administrators. Of course, that's coupled with being able to follow any rules or vaccination requirements that are outlined. But when you have groups of individuals who are challenged by various social and economic issues that are still choosing to remain remote or that are unsure that in person, now we raise the issue of what will happen with the learning gap, the achievement gap. Not only do school systems have to grapple with keeping their citizens safe, but now they have to grapple with ensuring that their students come back. They have to grapple with that if they come back, how do we now deal with all of these issues of COVID-19 that our teachers and administrators dealt with in the 18-month shutdown? And if they choose to stay hybrid or if they choose to stay home, how do we deliver that high-quality education to them? These are the challenges. And this is the impact of reopening our schools in COVID. But finally, one of the major challenges of reopening our schools in COVID-19 is the mandatory rules of masks and vaccines. As we know, not too many days ago, the FDA fully approved Pfizer vaccine, and of course, Moderna and others, or J&J, Johnson & Johnson, are not too far behind. We also know that there are testings that are underway for children under 12. And there's also a new vaccine made specifically for children that's currently being tested. So if we know that, and that's where we are, now we're dealing with the mandatory vaccines, mandatory mask wearing. I mean, anybody can do that, right? I mean, you don't have to be of a certain, you don't have to have any medical reasons, religious or anything exemption or the like. If you go into certain businesses and establishments, they say, hey, to come in, you got to wear this mask. So that should be an easy policy for school systems because we've done it in the pandemic across the board. But it's the mandatory vaccination. What are the rights of parents if they don't want their children vaccinated? What are the rights of the school districts if they have parents that don't want to have their children vaccinated? Well, we do know that in order to attend school, you have to show your vaccination record. And I just mentioned the Tdap and other vaccines that you have to show. Without that, you can't attend. So I do believe that this will be a part of that. Because of the full approval by the FDA, I believe that states and school systems and will move in the federal government. We've seen mandate vaccines for the military. We've seen certain companies mandate it. We've seen, of course, universities like ours have mandated it. So we're seeing across the board, both government, both private, education, they're mandating vaccines for their citizens because of the value of safety, the added value. But the fight will continue because you will have those that say, no, I'm not going to do it. So now what happens? Will they be able to attend the schools? If they're not attending schools, will school systems have to offer them a hybrid option? And what would be the impact of that hybrid option? What would be the impact and the strain on school districts in order to provide that hybrid option? And if the hybrid option is not really a major option in that community, what's the impact upon the citizens and the learning gap that's there? So these are all issues that we're going to deal with. These are all issues that we see. These are all issues moving forward that we're going to have to break down and really dissect and understand moving forward. But that's a closer look. And like most challenges, we learn from them, we rise to the occasion, and we do better. But just like every Sunday, we start a great conversation, we delve in, Marvin, but we run out of time. But I've thoroughly enjoyed this series of A Closer Look, and we'll continue this series during season 2. But again, we want to thank you for joining us here on State of the Water, where we bring movers, shakers, and policymakers to you to discuss issues that are important to the community. As we continue to move into the school year, we wish you nothing but success. We wish you nothing but blessings, and we wish you nothing but for your dreams to come true. We'll see you next Sunday.